can stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, so we don't have anyone, let's see, we have some attendees, just to let everybody know. We have Captain Biley and Dr. Lilly are both on. So why don't we go around the room and introduce each other? So we'll start from this corner.
Tanya Wagner, Secretary to the Chief.
Captain Greg DeGran.
Chad Ball, Police Chief, Canton.
Eva Davis, Director of Canton Public Library.
Kate Borninski, can't say my name right, Township Trustee.
Stephen Snyderman, trustee.
Diane Slavens, Canton Township Treasurer.
Anne Marie Graham Hudak, Canton Supervisor.
Tanya Ganguly, Township Trustee.
Brett Knobchef, Police Legal Advisor.
Rohit Singhal, Canton Resident.
Okay, great, thank you. I will promote these two to panelists too while we're talking, just so that will help. So we're going to we introduced everybody, and I will start with Chief Chad to talk about the program and what we're going to go through.
All right, thank you. Going back a few years, I had worked with a group out of Dearborn. We had talked about how to bring forth an oversight committee that actually had substance, that didn't cause conflict. And when we first brought this idea through the police department, we had some concerns because, even myself and our, Captain DeGran and our command staff, Captain Biley, were like, we think we're very good. But the one question that always comes up, at least through my service, is where's the voice in the community in their police department? So I spoke to a few folks. I asked kindly Eva if she could be their first chair to help lead this, because she's one of the best leaders I've seen lead a group of people. And we put together a subcommittee. She put together a subcommittee with, at the time, Deputy Chief Craig Wilshire, and she's been working with Captain Joe Biley since in maintaining the subcommittee. The subcommittee is made up of members of the CCIC, which is our Canton Coalition for Inclusive Communities. And what they do in the subcommittee is look at random cases selected by Tanya and before her, Linda, to try to take the bias that I would have or anyone else would have out of what cases they could see. And the reason I say that is it'd be impossible for Tanya to redact. She does FOIA and discovery for us over the years, and now being the secretary to the chief, she just does the FOIA and discovery for this group, or FOIA for this group, because these videos and this information have CJIS information, which is protected information that it can't be seen. So, around today's date, I believe we have about 70 use of forces and 70 complaints. So it'd be nearly impossible for this group that you see here and online to view all those cases. So those cases get redacted and they get reviewed by this group, and I receive feedback. Originally, there was two technical advisors. One was out of Michigan State University, Scott Wolf, and the second one is still with us, Brett Numchuff, who's also our police legal advisor. And Brett meets with the individuals that are on the committee and does training with them from both a labor perspective and Fourth Amendment perspective and context for the best practices of policing throughout the United States. Eva keeps us all wrangled in, and Tanya writes it all down and makes it work. And we get like a free flow of information. We get good feedback from the group, get some ideas and concepts that we bring back to our police department, and the captains in their roles. It's important for them to hear from me what's going on with the committee, because that's the whole point of this. Does the community have a voice in their police department? And what's interesting to note over the time I've been involved, at least when I see Eva's feedback, is it's the same feedback we have on ourselves, typically. Tone and manner is typically an issue. But overwhelmingly, we have one hell of a police force. The way our folks treat people, even in, these are just complaints, uses of force, complaints of bias, and so they're not the best contacts. They're the 1% of our cases, and this is what this group looks at. And I'll take a few minutes to take a breath, and I'll ask Eva to speak, and and explain what her role is and how the committee has been selected and how it's been maintained and some of the bylaws around that. So if you would.
Thank you, Chief.
So Eva, how long have you been the director of?
Of the library,
Yes.
15 years, since 2008.
And how long have you been the head person of this group?
So I'm about to complete my second full year as chair of this subcommittee. And then according to the bylaws of the subcommittee, I am required to step down as the chair. And I will remain on the subcommittee. You can do a maximum of 3 consecutive 2-year terms. And I do plan on staying on the subcommittee. I have been the co-chair with Captain Biley of the Canton Coalition for Inclusive Communities for, I think it's been like a dozen years. And the Police Transparency and Guidance Subcommittee is a part of the CCIC. So you have to be a member of the CCIC in order to be considered for the subcommittee. I will be succeeded as chair by Kanye Gardner, who's sitting across from me. And then I will become vice chair in support. We also have Rohit Singhal, who is a community member, who has been a member of the coalition for many years, who serves on the subcommittee. And then Dr. Denise Lilly who's I think on Zoom.
Yes.
Is part of the committee as well. We did mid-year say farewell to Rachel Miller, who was the representative from First Step, because she left that organization and was no longer eligible to serve. And we just last month welcomed new Canton resident, Ted Karanen, to the committee. And he has already been in touch with Brett and with Chad to receive the training on constitutional policing, Fourth Amendment, tone and manner and policies of the department, and we are excited to work with him. What else am I saying right now? I did. I just did. Yeah. Okay.
You get up to shut the door and you miss some of it.
I think another critical component is behind the scenes is from a police labor standpoint. We have a police legal advisor here, but there's a labor considerations that we have been fully embraced. You know, it was a little rough at the beginning, but once the command staff and the officers got to hear how this actually functioned, I think they really get it. This is important. But at first, you're concerned that, you know, folks are going to come in and start telling you what to do. And the role, the way it's set up, is Eva provides feedback to me. We introduce what we think is appropriate into the police department, and I provide a report to the township supervisor. We have Brett in the room too, and I think it'd be important to show and explain some of your role on the mic, in the room, and behind the scenes as it relates to police legal advice.
One of the things that I've noticed with the group since it started is, in the beginning, we had to spend some time educating on constitutional policing and search and seizure. But when we were coaching that, it was clear that everybody had their own understanding of what the Constitution said and what search and seizure was and what proper police tactics were. And over the course of time, I've watched the group come together with their understanding of what an appropriate police action should be based on the education that they've had and their personal perspective, and listening to the perspectives of the other people on the board. So what people don't see is the conversations that Chad and I have after we're taking into consideration everything that is said. There's been many a conversation that has occurred that has sparked some sort of change or started some sort of change within the police department based on what one person may have said or someone's reaction. So if somebody wanted to gauge whether this group is working, the gauge would be the conversations that Chad and I are able to have and the movement we're able to make from it. There are times when Chad and I will look at whatever the case may be, and our eyes will see one thing, but then the perspective of the community members is totally different. We, more than one time, have watched something and said, that might be an unreasonable comment or something like that. But we're told by the group that it was reasonable and understandable how the officer acted that way. And one of the things that Chad and I were impressed with from the beginning was the understanding of the community of some of the serious calls the officers go on, where they're many times victimized by the people that called them. They're yelled at, they're screamed at. No matter what they do, somebody's going to find something negative about it. So in the use of force cases that we brought forward, in the tone and manner cases that we brought forward, and in the search and seizure cases that we brought forward, they've been able to have a discussion that has allowed us to tweak training, or maybe decide that in a scenario-based training evolution, we can use some of the things that we learned at this, from this group. So all in all, over the course of time, it has been successful, and the way that I think that we can gauge success is the conversations we have afterwards, because it goes to show you what we've learned.
Yeah. Thank you, Brett. One of the things, too, when you sparked a little thought in my head is the captains and the lieutenants and the sergeants and the chief, I think we're by and large, the most critical of ourselves than what the public, and this group is the public in our eyes, and this group here, what the expectations are, because that standard that we hold, it is stressful to do 25 plus years trying to be the best you can be. Then we are not perfect by any means, but we're very good, and the standard that we hold each other to every day is you really start to realize it, especially when you go outside the organization and do promotional processes, like a lot of us do that for other organizations, and you start seeing the quality of employee elsewhere. While Southeast Michigan is wonderful, we're very impressed by our police department, and we're accountable. We take action. I know Captain DeGran can speak to this point, and Captain Biley's online if he wanted to speak on how quick the turnaround is on addressing issues. Something can happen on a midnight shift, and it's resolved by the time it's 7 a.m. All these documents stack up. It takes 2 months before it even makes it to the committee to even see, but we've already resolved that issue. Then it's confirmed, and it brings some affirmation, through that process. So, but what we provided for the group is Tanya put together all the cases that have been reviewed over that 1 year period. And you can see some of the responses, some of the things that popped up in our review of these cases. And the one thing that stood out, and I think Kanya brought it up, was like, why are you guys getting involved in these trespass stuff? Then the police legal advisor, he's a risk manager. He's like, you guys don't need to be doing this. And I'm the police chief, knowing that our citizens expect us to do certain things. And we do bring on risk to the organization because we get involved in things probably we shouldn't get involved in, but our citizens expect a pretty high level of service. So I don't know if you remember that case, Kanya, but if you could explain, like, from your perspective, give you some, maybe provide this committee some insight of what you see when you look at some of our cases and what we get involved in, and if Brett could just piggyback what you told me, like, why are you getting involved in this?
First of all, good evening. My name is Kanye Gardner. I am a community member here. Been living in Canton for 13 years. Actually, I worked in Canton for several years prior to living in Canton. Yes, sorry about that. So yes, like what Chief said, the one particular case was the gentleman at the Myers.
Yeah.
So I didn't understand why is it that it's a trespassing. Some of the cases, me personally don't understand why the police is involved with this. But one thing I have to say about our police department is they have a great leader, and so for someone that has a background in leadership development and culture, we have to thank Chief for the leadership that you provide, and then you can see that through the videos, how his officers conduct themselves with the the citizens that are, through the different cases. And, most of them are uttermost patience, overly communicate. At the same time, I think that a lot of the officers, they do a great job of really kind of mitigating the situation and trying to find a fast resolution or a resolution that's a positive resolution. So with this Myers case, they try to, the officers are trying to do the best they could for as working with the one gentleman. It ended up turning out to be like it was a trespassing. They couldn't get involved because it was trespassing on private property. So it's nothing that the citizen couldn't understand. Why is it that the police couldn't get involved? He just didn't understand. Just like most of us, we don't understand a lot of the rules either. So that's why we have Brett to help us.
And some of the background to that case, because Kanye brought up a great point, you're getting pushed into a situation where the bias, or maybe the unseen bias in that situation has anything to do with the police or the dispatch. It could be on the employee inside the store saying, we want this person out, and we get thrusted into those situations quite often, and we have to resolve it. But we can't assign, too much to that situation. Besides, we have a practice of, if a person wants you off your property, we're going to notify you, and that's their right. So it puts us in a bad spot, and that's what you picked up on.
It was more so a mediation.
Yeah.
Anything, and our officers showed great patience, try to explain the situation. However, the citizen was still upset, but at the same time, they didn't again filed a complaint. But at the end of the day, our police officers did what they're trained to do. So,
One of the things that Canton has that is somewhat separate than other departments is what you're talking about here is under that quality of life umbrella, right? Many department wouldn't take the time to handle the situation like Canton does. They would say, hey, guess what? This is your store. You don't want them there. You tell them that you don't want them there, rather than getting the police involved. So sometimes when you're taking care of a quality of life issue, you're getting involved in interpersonal communications and biases that you wouldn't normally get involved in. But because you're involved in it as a police officer, sometimes a citizen will think that it's the police that are biased. And really all they're trying to do is mediate the quality of life circumstance. And that is what makes Canton unique. The chief makes it a point to send out officers to respond to quality of life calls where other departments don't or won't. And that's one of the special things that you have here at Canton.
Yeah, and thank you for the support too. You shouldn't be unsaid, as we rush to, build the police force back up. We're afraid to lose some of those services because we scale. And right now we're holding on. We're doing good and we're hiring. And we'll be back in a year. But it should be known that these folks are maintaining and they hold that standard. We even have an officer who came to me and he makes this joke from his years of service here. He goes, because I live in Canton, I still want police officers to be sent to, and this is not a joke, this really happened in Canton, 2 squirrels fighting in the backyard, and he goes, I want that in my community because it means, we have a high level of service. It looks bad when we tell people no. There's some things we have to say no to, but that's a legitimate call for service in Canton that we've handled, and we're scaling back from that right now, obviously, but it's kind of funny to use as a analogy.
a chief, your officers came to handle a raccoon that was stumbling down the street in my neighborhood, and I called one time. So yes, those things happen, sir.
So I just wanted to point out, from my perspective, and I'm happy to hear from the others, even the ones on the Zoom that are serving on the subcommittee, the thing that we have noted over and over again is the demeanor of the officers, regardless of the situation. Chief Baugh talks a lot about tone and manner, and what the pattern that I have seen in the citizen complaints that have come forward. So when a citizen says, I want to file a complaint, or when a citizen says, I want to speak to your supervisor, or when a citizen after an interaction contacts the police department and says, I don't like the way this went. Because of the investments that you have made in the in-car camera systems, in the body-worn cameras, in the very in-depth paperwork and reporting that the officers have to do. We have actually been able to see that there is a difference. How do I want to say this? There's a difference between that officer was rude to me and that officer said something I didn't like. Like he gave me information that I was not ready to hear. So there is, I think, inherent in a lot of these interactions that the police have, I mean, one, the element of the unknown, right? Like the police officers are walking into situations and they're not exactly sure what's happening, and they have to take the time to gather that information. But once they have that information, when you're trying to deal with, two parties or more, one of them at least is not going to be receptive to what the officer has to say to them. And I think that comes through in what we have reviewed in the cases, that even if they are giving information or commands or trying to mediate a situation where the person doesn't want to hear it, they still say it. And their tone and demeanor is very level and very conversational, almost entirely across the board. It is only in the most dire situations that we've reviewed as far as cases where an officer has had to raise a voice, use a taser, draw a weapon. I mean, those are very rare occurrences. So for me, that's the everyday. And again, we're only seeing a fraction of those cases, but in a complaint situation or a use of force situation, when you see Canton police officers acting with that tone and manner and with that demeanor, I think that says a lot about what their everyday interactions are the other 99% of the time. And for me, that's what's been most striking.
Dr. Lilly or Captain Biley, do you want to add anything at all?
So can you all hear me?
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. So, I agree with everything that both Kanya and Eva just shared. One of the things that has been most apparent to me as well is the willingness to also admit when there's perhaps some things that could have gone in a different way. It doesn't happen a lot because, again, the team is so well prepared and handle themselves in such a professional way. But when there have been situations that have occurred where we've questioned perhaps a response, the willingness to have a discussion and or continue to do the professional learning to ensure that it won't happen again. So I also appreciate the fact that we are willing to admit there's still work to do at times and willing to do those things without becoming defensive about it.
Okay. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm camping on the west side of the state, so I appreciate you letting me jump in here.
Thanks for rubbing it in.
Just to go ahead, sir. I'm sorry, sir.
Is it raining there?
Thanks for rubbing that in.
Yeah, terrible weather out here, as you can tell. Just to echo what they're saying, one of the things that I appreciate about being part of the PTAG committee is just the fact that we avoid groupthink. It's nice to have everybody in the room. It fosters open conversation. I was surprised by that. It's easy to rubber stamp things and just say, well, that's okay, I'm good with it. And I've never seen that. There's usually in-depth conversation. It's very open. It's critical at times, which is good. It's good for us to be able to do that. We need that to be able to grow. And so that's important to have that open conversation. And again, try and make sure that everybody isn't just saying okay and just moving on with the next one. So those are the things that I found to be very, very valuable. And then I can take that, and it gives me perspective to come back to the organization again and have a better understanding of what direction we want our organization to go in.
Rohit, would you like to say anything? Captain DeGran?
Good evening, everyone.
He's usually very long-winded. So.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Get comfortable. Just kidding. This is my first meeting, so I've heard nothing but good things about the interactions and the conversations that take place. I'll just reiterate the communication that comes from previously from Chief Baugh and Captain Biley has been exactly what's been talked about. So this is a few weeks into this new position, and I was in several positions before, but that communication was always relayed if it was at a staff meeting or lieutenant's meeting or at the shift level at roll call, that the, I guess, reasonableness of the community to look at some of the complex situations that the officers are going against. And officers make mistakes, and I think 99% of the time, you have the officers, when there is a mistake, one, it's not a grave mistake. It's something that's minor, maybe maybe they got impatient or something like that, and they'll admit it, and then they move on. We correct it, we handle it, just like was mentioned earlier, is that it doesn't linger around. We don't let it linger for both the complainant and the officer. So once the complaint's made, that's stressful for the officer to go through that, to be waiting and waiting and waiting to see what's going to happen at the end of this internal investigation or internal complaint that's going on. So we try to expedite that as quickly as possible for both sides. For the complainant, that's fair to them to get back to them. But it's proud to work here. I've been here for a while, and having Chief Boz as a leader, like was mentioned already, comes from the top down, and our officers are trained well, and I think that's how we handle ourselves when they're out there, when they handle themselves when they're out there.
In this packet, I included, and this is just some of the required training that goes on in our organization.
Chief, could you please get closer?
Yeah, I'm sorry. In the packet, I included, actually staff created the document. Thank you, Tanya. And I'm going to mention that here in a second too. But this is just the required type of training that goes on throughout the organization every year or two, 5 years sometimes on some of these issues. But every roll call almost has some type of training component or connection to some previous training. And throughout the shift, there's training related to whatever incident that they're working on. And, the captain just came off running a shift, and now he's a captain of the patrol services. I'm sure he could speak to this point, but I'll talk about it. It's a constant training environment. Brett provides us a legal update once a month. We go through that. That's training that just started in the state of Michigan. Probably first I known about it was when we brought Brett in probably 4 years ago or so. Our legal updates were once a year, and it's real important to be up to date. It's not unusual that you'll see case law come out of the Sixth Circuit or go all the way to the Supreme Court. It doesn't get relayed to a police department 10, 12 years. You'll see people acting adversely to the law for years. We have regular training, like I've never seen training to this point. Now it's starting to grow, so I believe there's a number of agencies picking up on this, but I know we were fortunate enough with your support to bring that in some time ago. But this training, this is foundational training that's been in place long before me. Our previous directors instituted an environment here. We're well-trained and well-tooled. Police department is our foundation. And we're just trying to take the next steps, and working with this board and learning from the folks that we serve. It's been important for us. It's been eye-opening. But these types of things, as simple as it seems, they don't happen without history and a lot of work put behind the scenes. I know, and I'll mention Tanya for that matter. I always try to take this moment when I have a moment to talk about redaction and FOIA. One video, how long would that take?
Typically, for about a 20-minute video, it could take me anywhere from 4 to 6 hours.
So.
And we have a minimum of 2.
Yeah.
I mean, each case is pretty much a minimum of 2 cameras. There's usually the car cam and then the officer's body-worn camera. Or when there are multiple officers, then we have multiple views. And we appreciate that, Tanya.
And I just, for context, to understand the environment of policing, everyone has these body cams. We're one of the few professions that your workday is videotaped. Now the prosecutors, we complain often because of the backlog. All these body cams, it takes her, what'd you say, 4 hours for 20 minutes?
4 to 6 hours, yes.
One felony drunk driving goes to the Wayne County prosecutor. 2 police officers are likely to be there. There's probably how many hours of video in a drunk driving case?
I'd say probably 4 to 6 hours usually.
So that prosecutor is supposed to review every second of that video. So when we wonder what's going on at the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office, stuff like, if they're doing their job the way they're supposed to do it, there's no way they could get the work done. So just to bring forth a simple product like this for the community to see, that's why they're only seeing 2 cases a month. When there's 140 uses of forces and complaints that we have probably to date. So let's give you some background.
Some of this is your own making. I do want to point that out. So and Brett talked to us about this before as a subcommittee, that the Canton Police Department approaches citizen complaints in a more comprehensive manner than other departments do. By merely saying out loud, I want a supervisor, it triggers a citizen complaint. It doesn't have to be a formal written email or a letter. It doesn't have to be, I want to set up a meeting with the chief and file a complaint. Simply by saying, I need to talk to somebody else, that triggers a citizen complaint. And you also, the department has a more comprehensive definition of use of force. So if a taser is pulled, a use of force report is filed. If your gun is unholstered, a use of force report is filed. Whether you fire the taser or the gun, it doesn't matter. They want to review it because they have a commitment, the department, to the training of the officers before they get to a point where they do that. So that even if they have to unholster their gun, even if they don't fire, they still want to review it with the officer and say, let's talk about the situation. Let's make sure that we're having the conversation about what were you seeing and what were you feeling and what were the circumstances. So some of this is of your own making, but we don't fault you for that because I actually think that it's really good. But that was something, is that still true that there are not a lot of departments that handle them this way?
The way the Canton responds to a citizen complaint from the moment it's initiated by a citizen to the final letter and determination by the chief is unmatched in the state of Michigan. And there's no question in my mind that that's the case. So when a citizen makes a complaint at Canton, they're going to pay attention to it. They're also going to be educated by the police chief's letter. And then the letter itself isn't a check-the-box letter. Each letter, that person's specific complaint is talked about in that letter, and that doesn't happen everywhere else, and that's what makes the complaint process at Canton unique and tops in the state.
Thank you.
I think the next tricky question would be, you be careful what you ask for, but I'm going to ask for it. We have the board here, and it's good to learn and to grow, and we talked about, Captain Biley talked about learning and growing. What's your expectation of us and some of the things that you think you would like to see in the coming years from your police department is something I'd like to ask, besides any other questions you might have.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having this, and thanks to the subcommittee here. And thanks to Tanya for doing this. And my question, I have I went through the complaints and things like this that are here, that are recorded here. And there was one situation where you talked about the social worker. And my question is, in any situation, since we have the social worker for a year now, or?
Couple years.
Yeah,
Yep.
a couple of years. So, are there situations where, is there any situation where the social worker goes with the police, like the police officer? Does that work that way? Like, is the social worker in the scenario sometimes?
It's actually happening more organically. We didn't really set it up that way. It was more of a second responder. But our current social worker, which is really not a social worker, she's a psychologist, so we call her a police clinician. I'll give you anecdotal evidence. Tonight, the committee, I apologize because I talked about it a couple weeks ago. There was a armed man at a senior facility that was suicidal and homicidal. And we had the situation cordoned off. The officers were doing a beautiful job with the de-escalation conversations, just great work. But she came, and it was safe. And we introduced her into the situation. Immediately, the what we would call the subject, suspect, defendant, engaged and locked in with her. And the program, the concept, just really matured right then and there because she helped resolve the situation quicker. So you'll see that every once in a while. The volume's pretty high, and I can give you the numbers right now. Captain Grand just made the changes on our update for the week, but well, my eyes are gone, so Captain Grand's going to speak for this. Can you explain how many
Reading glasses.
referrals? We're trying to get the referrals to our social worker. How many referrals we've had this year, Greg?
Yeah, for 2023, we have had 310 mental health calls for service. So that's how many times we've been called where the officers documented a report, and that Clemens code has been used, which we're getting much better. We've gotten much better over the years of properly documenting a mental health call. And out of the 310, there's been 254 referrals to our police clinician.
So she'll go down to sometimes 5 or 6 in a week, and I've seen her up over 10 on referrals for the week. So that adds up, because that doesn't go away sometimes after that first contact she has with that group trying to get services. And a lot of times those folks, for instance, glasses, successfully referred to services 61% of the time. That's pretty good. There's 10% we're still trying to determine, and there's 23% we can't make contact with sometimes. And only 6%, once we actually make contact, declined help from our clinician. So we're seeing some success. That partly answers your question, but
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, having the social, the psychologist or the social worker in part of the police force, helping, with some of these calls that you get, like, because as part of responsible policing that you have, Canton is way ahead of neighboring communities, and that's why we have the social worker program here, and
right.
that was my question.
You're going to see a request for board action to extend the contract for a couple more months with Agira. We're building a police clinician direct hire that goes to the Merit Commission on the 21st of this month. So if that gets through the Merit Commission, it'll come to you folks for consideration.
The subcommittee has discussed this, and we are in support of that. I think we had consensus. I know, we know that one of the frustrations is that at 11 o'clock on a Friday night, you need to have someone available, which is tough with just one person. Yeah. So we do support that. And then we did officially support additional funding. Chief Ball, he's like, oh yeah, I got more money. Did apply with the Community Foundation of Southeast Michigan for a 21st Century Policing grant to help offset the technical training advisor, which they did approve for 1 year. Or they're going to?
I don't know the exact number yet. I believe they're working. What's nice about this, we don't touch the money. They go directly with their technical advisor, and it doesn't cause more work. But we wrote a grant, and they accepted the grant. The 21st Century Policing comes out of the Obama administration that put together the best practices for policing. And it's been the standard since, I think, 13, 14, when that came to be. Every promotional exam, every police department that has any type of intent of being progressive or using these founding concepts for their police department and their practices and their policies. So. But CP21 Solutions grew out of that as a nonprofit, and we're able to apply for a grant through that group twice.
Great.
And he knows more about them.
Can I add something about the social worker program? It works. We've needed it in law enforcement for decades. And now we're training officers that, guess what? It's wrong for us to expect you to be able to also be a social worker or a clinician. You can have an awareness, but that's not what you do as a profession. And with that being said, Kanye just mentioned that your calls are, that's at least one a day,
Yeah.
a mental health call. And that's consistent with other clients that I have, where they've had 500% increases over the past 5 years with mental health calls. Some of it may be that we're probably classifying it appropriately. But I have one client, and they have, I think, 4 social workers, clinicians. But what they found is, it's that 11 o'clock at night, it's the 2 o'clock in the morning. So as you build the program, one of the things you need to be cognizant of is, it can't just be a 9 to 5, right? Because it doesn't always happen 9 to 5. So that means somebody's going to get stuck with the hours that nobody wants. But what a social worker and a clinician can do to calm things down because of the way that they're trained augments the way that the police officers are trained, and it ends up solving a problem without there having to be force, without there having to be violence, without there having to be yelling and screaming and carrying on. So I know that Canton and the city of Lansing, your social worker has been talking with the city of Lansing, and it's such a new profession, that they're just getting their association started. And Canton and Lansing are leading the way in that.
Yeah. Yeah, Lansing's ahead of the game with the numbers, and we're working with them, learning how their system works. And I guess, a little foreshadowing, once we get up to full staffing, there's going to be a request from my office to the board at some point with the consent of the supervisor, is we like to grow the program into a call response. We have, like Joe Halver and I spoke 2 years ago about, I have a drug team, essential surveillance team. We have a detective bureau. We have all these different bureaus. And the call from the community is, how about, what are you doing about this? We've become the de facto mental health professionals after hours. And it costs money. And we're a lean organization, so the next ask is to grow this police department, but a small number of those officers, we would like them to be, that's their job, to go around and answer these runs with a clinician. So, but we're not there yet.
I will.
Thank you. I was nervous. I wasn't sure which way that was going to go. Thank you all for presenting to us what you've been doing. It's been, I don't know if it's been a year since you've been here to present. Time flies sometimes.
Yes, it's been a year.
Yeah. Question, I saw that Mr. Wolf's grant ran out. Is that why he left the?
Yeah, so we had 2 technical training advisors under the original grant. And at the completion of the cycle, I'm gonna extrapolate here and say that that CP21 determined that we were doing okay and we didn't need 2 people.
Okay.
We insisted on keeping Brett.
Sure.
Because there was
Thank
some
you.
utility in that, given his work with the department. And Professor Wolf was moved to one of the other grantees, that, another community,
Another
yeah.
community. Was his guidance helpful?
I thought
Mostly
so.
watched, right?
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah.
He
He comes
teaches
from
criminal
that-
justice.
Yeah, he comes from that PhD perspective. And so we're able to get the law, the PhD social perspective, and the practical application together. It worked well. Your group was doing good, but there were other groups that weren't, that needed some assistance. And so he plugged in somewhere else where they needed him. I think he enjoyed this work better than the other places.
Some of the
he
other
had to
places.
go.
Go ahead, Chad.
On Dr. Wolf, you might see a reappearance with him because we've had some conversations about data. I don't know who was in the room when I had these conversations. Is it me, you, or?
It was me.
So he does a lot of data analysis. He's a PhD, and they do a lot of analysis. And you can see some of his work if you look the traffic stop data for the Michigan State Police, and you can see some of his work there. But he's very well published, and I can see him reappearing at some point.
Okay.
We can figure a way to take data and make a product out of it.
You asked if there's any asks of us, and the only thing I could think of is, are we interfacing with other communities, both locally and nationally on these types of programs to make sure we're still maintaining a best of breed in this area.
So we had a meeting with 21st Century Policing and one about the grant and reviewing the grant that ended and then also talking about the grant that we had applied for. And one of the things that they asked of us is that in the coming year, we make, as a subcommittee, as a police department, as a township, a more concerted effort to communicate the work that we've been doing and to really embrace serving as a model. We have a meeting later this week as a subcommittee, and I was going to update the subcommittee there. But they have an expectation that we will be able to demonstrate more of an outward focus and communicating, not just to Canton, but to other communities and other police agencies, this is what we are doing. So that is an expectation, and I think they came through pretty clearly in the meeting that that's what they wanted
I
to see.
suspect we're on the cutting edge, but it's always good to learn from other communities as well. There could be just one little component that you could add. So, yeah, reaching out is great idea in my.
We're at the real beginning stages, and the turn it took so far with what I'll just explain. I'm working with the Washtenaw County Sheriff and the Detroit City Police Chief and a part of this group to have a deeper understanding of how these things work, I thought, but it took another spin, so I'll keep you updated about collectively as a state, because a lot of chiefs have come together to meet on these types of topics, but it really turned into more officer wellness, so which is an extremely important topic for the long term of the success of the organization. But that's one thing. But in the beginning, too, we had a lot of meetings with other agencies that they were setting up. And I think UD was pretty impressed with our work. You might know more about that.
Well, I had a meeting with U of D today.
Oh.
And yes, they were impressed with the work that was done. The individual I talked to, their responsibility in this whole grant process is to summarize what has been done and identify the successes. Canton is a success as far as the initial grant goal was concerned. And I too have had conversations with them about us, not necessarily an outreach, but letting people know what we're doing. And there's a number of ways that we can do that. There's the local, but it's also maybe law enforcement agencies around the state and United States could learn, because it is a unique product. It is doing exactly, I think it's doing exactly what the chief and this group had wanted done. And you're right. Why not let everybody know?
Well, I couldn't be happier to live in a community that's embraced this. So, and how well you guys are executing it is very satisfying. So, thank you very much. I just want to know if either squirrel got a restraining order, though.
They both got arrested, thrown in the
They received diversion.
Of the diversion program. Smart, very good. In line with what we're preaching here.
Yeah, I think, too, I don't know if this stimulates any thoughts, but just please consider, the next couple years to 5 years, it's important to have these committees, because you're going to see a young police department that was already young. And training is going to be critical for our success. And next year, we still won't be perfect, but we're working towards it.
Kate, go ahead.
Yeah, so I have several questions. Sorry, and thank you to everyone for your service. We appreciate you so much. There were many more cases than the committee could review. So how were the cases that were reviewed chosen?
Before Tanya, they were randomly chosen by Linda. And I'll let Tanya speak how she, tell them exactly what I say.
Yeah. The chief gives me guidelines, and I just go into our complaint software, and I just randomly choose. So when I choose, I can see that it would be a good fit. There was one case that I did choose last month specifically because it had a lot of hot topic points that I wanted the committee to see. There was mental issues, there was drug use, accusations of police brutality. So I thought it was important for them to see how our officers handled it. So essentially, yeah, it's just a random pick of the complaints that we have going. Use of force, Captain Bielli chooses that and lets me know which one he would like for the committee to see. So.
Thank you. If you don't mind, I have a couple questions about two particular cases that are in the packets. They actually are both from April 20th, 2023, and it's page 4. So it's the middle two cases. The first one is the one where the person was put on their stomach and he said he couldn't breathe. And I guess I want to understand that better. And I see that that officers are trained to do that. But if someone's saying that they can't breathe, that worries me. And so I just...
Yeah, Captain DeGran would be great to respond to this, but I think for the committee, I think this was the real chaotic scene with the man at the scene, real big man.
Yeah, the big guy.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the officers are trained to place a subject on their stomach. That is to complete the handcuffing process and to control the subject. They're also trained as soon as they can, especially if there's a complaint of a lack of, airflow, roll them on their side, get up in a sitting position, get them comfortable. That's a part of the training. So that would have been done immediately if
Was
they
that
were
done in
handcuffed.
this case?
I'm not familiar with it. It was.
Might be able to respond better. Yeah, I remember, there's a sense of urgency. This man,
Yeah.
I believe there was multiple handcuffs that were needed to be applied.
Was this in an apartment complex? An
Yeah,
apartment building?
Captain Biley's still on. He's the one who
Yeah.
presented this case, but I think there was no, it was might have been a mobile home.
It was.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, mobile home.
It was, Chief, if I could. Yeah, it was a
Please.
mobile home. What was interesting to me about this case when I was watching is exactly that, is what I'm looking for is from our officers, is are they reacting in real time to what's happening, or are they kind of processing and waiting? And so when you see somebody that's prone like that and is telling you that they can't breathe, sometimes the officers are slow to respond, and that can cost somebody sometimes their life. And so what I was looking for there is when the person says, I can't breathe, are the officers always assessing and evaluating the use of force that they need? And are they always assessing and evaluating the techniques that they're applying? And so that person was resistant. And so at the time, they weren't able to move him because he was refusing to move. And so when he says he can't breathe, they were able to get him on his side. Unfortunately, he was still resisting, and they were eventually able to get him up once he was able to, they were able to get him under their control. And so, again, what I'm looking for from our officers is we don't want robots out there that are just doing one thing. I want to see them always assessing, always evaluating, and then applying the training that we give them. And that was one of the things that struck me in that incident.
One of the main concerns, Trustee, I have with this case, in cases like it, is in this video, there was in this video, what concerned me most, and I see it often, is as much as we love patience, sometimes patience puts us in a bad situation. And this person escalated, and they were doing everything they could, and they did a nice job. But sometimes it's better to put the cuffs on quick and get it secured before it gets out of hand. And in this environment, that's what you're seeing from our police officers throughout the United States. Sometimes they're scared. They do not want to cause anyone to go to.
You don't know, I mean.
You don't,
they
not so
don't know
much,
what they're
not of
doing
the
and
physical
what the
fight.
situation is when they arrive. They don't know.
They don't want to
They
cause
don't know
somebody
if
to
they're-
die and go to prison.
Yeah.
And we have to train them not only to act quick, but also be patient.
Right.
This guy was big. very big, and
Yeah.
I'm glad Captain brought this one to our attention because it shows like great de-escalation. It was very nice to see that part. But he couldn't breathe. But go ahead, Kenny.
No, I was saying he was a big gentleman. Yeah, it was a lot. It showed a lot of patience, but in this situation, he was resisting. So they had to do what they can to get handle the necessity and take care of the situation quick too.
Yeah. Yeah, it just stood out to me because when I see I can't breathe,
Right.
that worries me. Also, it worries me that officers, they're not doctors, so they're not necessarily equipped to make the determination, oh, is he just saying that, or can he really not breathe? And
And we did get in a conversation, and this is where Brett's expertise, we've had multiple conversations about use of force, about like techniques that have evolved, techniques that are no longer recommended or allowed. And I think we had a brief conversation about that in relation to this case.
One of the things that is happening in law enforcement is we're now getting better at getting better. We were stagnant for years, and it was the same training over and over again. Well, it's not 1982 anymore. And really during the course of the past 5 or 6 years, law enforcement has moved to a different level to where an officer is cognizant. If someone says they can't breathe, in 1982 or 92 or 02 or 12, they say, hey, you're yelling, you can breathe. Now officers know that's not the case. And when I read the summary that they're trained to be on their stomach, it's momentarily. Officers now know that, yep, there's a time where they're gonna have to be on their stomach because that's how you're able to do it. But boom, they're up and you're getting them talking. So with the evolution of law enforcement training, things like happened a couple years ago should not be happening anymore if the department is serious about getting better with the training, and Canton is.
so the next one that I was wondering about is the one directly after that with the individual with autism.
That's correct. And I don't remember everything about this case, but I do recall there's a long discussion with a person that was on the spectrum at the front desk. And during that conversation, and we've seen it many times, where just out of just education around being on the spectrum, the officer referred to that as being a disorder, a mental disorder, and there was a conversation and training around that topic.
Okay. I guess, I was wondering about this because when the ad hoc police clinician committee met, those cases were being coded as a mental health issue.
Right.
And so, and I know this took place prior to that conversation. But just wondering, what, you said it's a training issue for the officer, this says that. So has there been training on that?
Greg could probably speak to her, Joe can speak to a lot of the training that happens around autism. We have, I forgot the name of the company that comes in. Joe, do you recall? One of the latest trainings that we had, I believe we hosted it at the Village Theater.
We did. We tried, we did. And I just spoke with them the other day too. We try and use different vendors to get different approaches, but there's one company that sticks out that we used quite often. And I apologize, it escapes me at the moment.
Okay. Yeah, I do. There's one vendor we've used too. He's actually, I believe, a retired lieutenant. His child's being diagnosed with autism, I believe. But the training, I believe, is at least a half day to full day. But in this scenario, this was shift training because there wasn't like a training class ahead of time.
Yeah.
But you've seen it, and you saw it in our presentation with the ad hoc, with the police clinician. There's a lot of work to be done around that because it just, I wouldn't say ignorance, just education.
Yeah. I would agree.
If it's okay. So I remember reviewing this case. I don't know if I took the complaint, but I know I remember reviewing the video on this. There was a point in the video early on in the conversation where the complainant made a statement that was confused by the officer. She said something about mental health, mental something, and he heard that, and that's when, and he says that after she gets upset because she corrects him about autism not being a mental health issue or mental disorder. And then he tries to say, well, you just said it was, and I remembered that part of the video. So it's a combination, I think, here where there was a misunderstanding at the same time. Could have been, handled a little bit better, but we have it's yearly training that we're either attending or being a part of as far as the mental health, and it's a constant conversation at the shift level. So,
Chief, if I can,
please.
It's Autism Alliance Michigan who provides that training for us.
Okay. Yeah.
And I just look back on our police reports. So that last incident we were talking about with the use of force with the gentleman that said he couldn't breathe, we summoned the fire departments. The fire department came and treated him after we had placed him into custody. I didn't want to say that out loud without checking the report and making sure I was pretty positive that's our standard procedure. But after reading the report, we were able to get the fire department out there.
You want to see a group of officers squirm is when you watch one of those videos that makes it to CNN, and you see someone laying on the ground like that guy did momentarily, and you just, especially as a boss, if you've been on the job, anybody that's big, this we got to get this person up. So, because we're taught for the 27 years I've been here, probably the last 22 of it, we've learned a lot about positional asphyxiation. So.
Sorry, going back to the case of the individual with autism.
Yeah.
This doesn't really pertain to the committee, so I'm sorry, but at one point we had that autism registration form that families could fill out if they wanted to register with the police department. Do we still have that up, do you think?
We still do. Captain Biley might be able to help me out with. Patty is working with dispatch to get those.
Do we know if anyone has registered?
I think it's a low
child?
number, but
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you off. There's someone here knows. I don't know what the number is. I don't know.
I don't know the exact number. It's a program that we've tried to push.
Yeah. I mean,
There's
some
obviously a
families
comfort level with the
probably
parents
choose
there.
not to do it. I think it can be helpful.
Right.
And I guess I would just say, let's try to make it a little easier to find, because
Yeah.
I had to really search for it last time I looked for it.
We want to hire you to help us with our website.
Yeah.
Sorry, I have more questions.
All right, no problem.
So you asked, what do we want?
Yeah.
What I thought of is, so we have the transparency dashboard, which looks like it's not up to date.
Right.
But is it possible to put data about like what the committee is doing on there? Like, we've reviewed so many cases and
Yeah, we could.
things
Yeah.
like that?
Yeah, we need to update that position that works on that update is vacant right now. So,
Okay.
and we have one person that put in for it. We're going to slowly migrate that position in the coming months back in the service.
Okay. So if and when that happens, since this is the Police Transparency and Guidance Committee, let's be transparent.
Yeah, fair enough. Judge Giroux just told me the other day, I had no idea that you had this committee in place, and he thought it would be a great idea if we publicized it, But,
Yeah.
the intention was to get the voice into the police department, and that's what we're trying to do.
We are also a toddler subcommittee. We're only 2 years old. So I just want to say, like, the training that we have received and getting ourselves up to speed and making ourselves feel comfortable, just speaking from us. And then I do know from my conversations with former Deputy Chief Wilshire, with Chief Baugh, and then also with Captain Biley, that the five of us on the subcommittee really wanted to make sure that we were being respectful of the concerns of the police officers, of being under that kind of citizen scrutiny. We wanted to make sure that we were demonstrating some integrity about being committed to understanding the police policies and making sure that we were applying our recommendations appropriately. So there was really, I think, and you all can correct me if I'm wrong, more of an internal focus for us of just sort of like, let's not screw this up. And I think that from the 21st Century Policing group, I think they recognize that, which is why they didn't tell us before, like, we want you to publicize more. But now that we're coming, into, or I guess, out of our terrible twos, they have an expectation, like, okay, you guys need to start communicating this more. So I agree with you, and I just want to affirm that I'm hearing what you've said.
Yes, yes, and I totally understand the concern. That's why, we don't want names and, things like that, just data as far as, so many cases were reviewed and things like that.
Diane?
Oh, I have one more, if you don't mind. Sorry. And this is sort of outside of the committee too, but just wondering if there have ever been complaints that originated with an officer, like if two officers went out and one saw something he didn't like, or?
We've investigated internal complaints over the years. I don't recall our last one. They don't happen quite often, as I just can't think of one right now, but
Okay.
we've investigated. And there's some HR rules around what I can disclose about internal investigations on employee conduct
Okay,
against employee.
okay, sorry.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the presentation. It's very good. And I do understand you want to get your feet grounded and understand everything before you put data out there. So thank you guys very much. Thank you, Tanya, for all your hard work getting everything together. I just, I appreciate everything you're doing, and I know you're learning a little bit with each incident. And I did notice that you did talk a little bit, the subcommittee concerns about the officers too, because they're under a lot of stress.
Yeah.
And what are you doing any kind of training or that, just to make sure our officers are?
Actually, this command staff, the command staffs I was a part of as a young command officer never really took any positive action towards peer support. The group that came in behind me and these folks that are with me now, now I'm the chief, they brought forth peer support. We have doctors that help. There's a major incident, like, for instance, a child is killed, or any traumatic incident like that. Some of the recent cases are like that, where children are killed or by their parent or something like that. We'll bring in support from that perspective. And EAP is always an option, but it's really that peer support team that comes in and does a debriefing on that. And they work, and they're coached and trained. The folks that are involved in that are coached and trained. They're quite active on some major losses internally in our organization. That peer coaching team did a very nice job for our folks to help provide that resource and provide a space for some issues. Some things that are brought up by the committee, which I didn't even think about, and I think Denise brought it up. One of the first years, I never thought about, what are you doing? One of the cases where an African-American officer just got berated by a racist, for lack of better terms. And what are you doing for that officer? And I never really thought about it, because, internally everyone embraces them. You could see from the video, like, the support from the other officers, and what happens in the organization where they're, cops are close, but I never considered, how we address those issues, So we go back and we ask, and it's a fine line. Are we pushing too far into someone's personal space? Or are we not doing enough? And that's a good question. I think the peer support program is good. I haven't found a way to address those issues necessarily with a specific program.
You mean internal issues?
Like
With
for
the
instance,
racist?
you have an African American officer who just gets berated by a racist. Do I have a program for that? No.
Well, we
But-
do have the internal DEI program
Yeah.
you could utilize. I
Right.
mean, Frida's great on that,
Right.
so she could definitely help with that.
And then I'm cautious too, because when you talk to the officer's like, I'm good, just leave me alone. You know, but you don't, you know, that's part of understanding that I can't understand, you know, that I don't know how far to push. And that's kind of like the mix you have to understand as a supervisor. It's an environment that hasn't been addressed before, so.
Yeah, but, I mean, anytime anyone's berated by someone, that raises their stress level, so.
Oh, yeah.
I think,
It's,
yeah.
it's like, come to a
definitely.
midnight shift, Kate. It's, you get berated quite often.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like a ride and
Believe
drive.
me, we know.
Yeah, just like your board meeting the other night. It's not very similar.
I'm sure it's different for you.
But we're cautious. We're cautious, but we take care of our folks better than we ever have. And it hurts when you see that, you know.
Yeah, but even if someone says they're okay, they may not
Yeah.
really be okay.
Right. That's true.
And when Denise brought this up, Dr. Lilly, who's on the Zoom, I agreed with her, and we had a conversation about, again, the randomness of you don't know when you're going to be called or where you're going to be called. So if I am the Asian American officer working that area and I respond to the call, I can't just say, oh no, I know that a racist lives there and it's going to be a tough response for me and I'm not going to go. Like, I can't hand it off to someone else. And I think Dr. Lilly's point was sort of the accumulation
Yeah.
of those comments bringing you down, whether you're an African-American officer, whether you're a female officer. And I do think, speaking personally, that that is a really good thing for you guys to consider, because as you are working to have a police department, a public safety department really, that reflects and mirrors the Canton community, I think that those concerns are going to come up more and more about how do we support, how do we recruit and retain, like how do we diversify and expand our department in this community, knowing that they're going to run into those kinds of problems. And I appreciate, and I know that we all do, the things that you guys are putting in place. But that does remain a concern for us, because it builds up over time. Because when you have a trauma, if a child is killed, that's a big deal, and there's a whole thing. But, you know, years of people calling you sweetheart and honey adds up also.
It's a good point. You know, we've opened that door, certainly, where it's okay to have emotion. And it used to not be okay. I can quote someone that led me, a young officer, that said, take a pill and buy a dog. I'm not responsible for your feelings.
Yeah, there's a previous administration that we will not repeat.
So we've moved on, and like all things, we learn from them. And our foundation is great, and we've learned a lot. But we've learned that the cup does get full, and we're not going to close our minds to continuous improvement would be the proper term. But these things hurt us when we see them, and we try to find a way to provide resources without overstepping.
Diane, were you done? I'm sorry. Oh, go ahead, Brett.
You know what?
Oh,
Just one other quick thing. I will
Yeah.
say, a couple of times we've had to call the officers to de-escalate issues with residents, and they are awesome. We are
Right.
so fortunate to have them so close by. So thank you, guys.
anybody want to add anything? I don't know if Dr. Lilly or Captain Biley, if you wanted to add anything. I know sometimes it's hard to see your hands. Okay.
So I really don't have anything to add. Again, just echoing what has already been shared. With regard to my initial concerns, and Chief highlighted one of the conversations that we had, but again, knowing several officers personally and professionally, and recognizing, as Chief said, that the cup becomes very full very quickly. And sometimes people say, well, no, I'm fine. What do we do to make sure that across the board, regardless of background, race, whatever, that we're making sure that there's supports in place? Because what you then see a lot of times is officers suffering in ways that are just as harmful and may explode into other capacities. So we want to just make sure that people are taken care of.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I just want to talk about a couple of things. So I was in Ann Arbor, no, actually, I was in Detroit at Michigan Roundtable, and there was a lady in line with me, and she's introduced herself, and she said she was part of the Ann Arbor Police Oversight Committee. And I said, oh, well, we have something similar. It's not called that, and we don't handle it like, some of the other cities do. And she said, I'd never heard of Canton having anything like this. She said that there's actually conventions that we go to, and we all meet and talk about best practices. So I don't know if you're familiar with that at all.
I am familiar that there's very formal groups out there, even created by law and ordinance. And you'll see it in the city of Detroit. I know Ann Arbor has it throughout the United States. I've actually seen that convention posting. Just I never considered at this point these folks going to a convention. We're very fortunate to have some professionals in there. We have people running major components of Wayne State with Kanye. Mm-hmm. We have our library director. We have our DEI coordinator director for the Plymouth Canton schools. We have IT right here running waste management. So we have so many folks that are very busy. I never thought about asking them to do more, but you got a good point.
Well, no, it was interesting that they hadn't heard of us. So I think it'd be great, like you had somebody coming in, we had the grant from Kellogg, and then maybe even asking them to come back and continuing doing case studies, because you guys are really breaking new ground. We want to show some good ways that work and how we take care of our officers and our residents. So just think about that. That's something to think about.
Great.
Another thing was, it was when I went to the senior executive leadership class, we had a whole day in policing, and it was interesting because they spoke of the history of policing and where it started. And it was, punishment, slaves, getting slaves back, things like that. But what they talked about is we have to look further up the chain. So residents or people call police when they don't know who else to call. I mean, squirrels fighting, rabid dog, neighbor's fence, swarm of bees. In one of the case studies, we even said, one woman said she really liked the police in her community because whenever she called, they came, even if it was to have a cup of tea on her porch. That was policing to her. But the interesting part is, which is a nice way to think of policing. I mean, how many times do you guys get invited to dinner, right? But if she's like, I don't know. But if you think about what we need to do as a society is, how do we look further up the chain and start to help people before they get to the point where they feel they have to call the police because their family's out of control, or there's a mental illness happening, or somebody's hurt, or two people getting in fights over an accident. So that was an interesting way to look at it also. And I think you guys are a subcommittee of CCIC, but we've started to look at CCIC and how do we start bringing organizations that live in the community together to start helping the community, start hearing what the police are going through, hearing what other residents are going through, and how can we bring those organizations together. Things like the Rotary Club, the Lions Club even said something, and interfaith community outreach, bringing faith leaders together, bringing organizations together. You also have ACL. Who else comes to those meetings?
We have ADL.
ADL.
PFLAG.
PFLAG. First Step comes.
Almost all the houses of worship that I could think of, or the larger ones. Schools?
Yeah, the schools come. So those are organizations. If you start to hear each other's issues, they all keep asking us to send resources to them. So can you put board members or staff members on our boards? I said, no, why don't you come here and we can all work together and you can hear what each organization is doing or what help is needed and help each other that way. So I'm glad that we just started this getting more people at the last meeting. So I'll continue to invite people, but if the community sees where we need those safety nets, before it gets to the point where somebody has to call the police or feels afraid enough to call the police or feels they have nowhere else to turn but to call the police, so then that relieves a lot of the stress off of our officers also and our community. So what other safety nets can we put in place before people get to the place? Obviously, there's still going to always be times when you have to call the police, but.
I think that was a great idea, but getting the community involved, because if the problem's resolved before it gets to us, that solves the community problem. Just getting them to the meeting, the CCIC meeting, the first step you're going to see is that connectivity to our police clinician. then over time and over years, if it works, bringing in more organizations, you'll see police reach out to them on their own, not even go through a clinician service. That's when you start to integrate the whole community into solving problems. But there's no negative to that. You just got to
Right.
keep people involved and take action.
Right, no, I agree. Even with the recent plane crash, one of the families that ended up staying with us was a Muslim family who were refugees, and we were able to call in MCWS, which is a Muslim community of Western suburbs, and because they couldn't speak English except for one of them, and they were able to help translating and find out what they needed, and we all helped get them to a hotel. So, pulling on our community organizations like that is, if we get to know each other, that will help a lot. I hope more up front before we get to the part where we're calling police in.
Right. And that effort can't stop because you won't be able to document the success.
Yeah, right.
I'd be cautious too to document success saying the calls for service for mental health go down
Right.
with the clinician services, because I think they're going to go up once they understand that resource is available in our community. And that's okay. Because we go to squirrels fighting.
Might be another generation, right? But maybe we'll get there.
Yeah, true.
All right. Are there any other questions or comments on the board or anyone here? No? Online, anybody? Dr. Lilly or Captain Biley? No? Well, thank you for the presentation, and you guys are doing a great job, and we're very proud of you, and thank you for giving all your time. This is a very worthy effort for our community and showing others, right?
Right. Yeah, thank you. Go Cas Tech.
Go Cass.
And next year, Chair Kanye Gardner will be presenting.
That's right.
to
We'll have a
you.
new chair, Kanye Gardner. Welcome. Good job. And thank you.
Very excited.
And Eva, thank you for all your leadership in this. You helped to guide us through this, and you actually helped write the bylaws. I remember seeing that going back and forth, and being on the CCIC for 12 years, a dozen or so or more. All right, great. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Support.
Motion made by Trustee Snyderman and seconded by Trustee Ganguly. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.